and welcome back. I'm really glad you're here again because today we are diving into one of the most legendary tales of all time, the Fall of Troy, a story of gods, heroes, betrayal, and destiny, where the mightiest city of the ancient world met its fiery end. So get comfortable, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because this really helps me a lot. And then thank you very much and let's begin. Enjoy and have fun watching.
The war that would never end. Long ago, it began with something as fragile as an apple, a single golden fruit cast by the goddess Eris, the goddess of discord, into the feast of the gods. Upon it, the words were inscribed, "To the fairest," and thus began a quarrel that would unravel kingdoms. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, three divine powers, each demanding to be called the most beautiful. Their vanity turned to rivalry, and their rivalry to destruction. For the mortal chosen to judge them was Paris, a prince of Troy. When offered bribes by goddesses themselves, Paris chose love, or what he thought was love. Aphrodite promised him the heart of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. But Helen was already wed to King Menelaus. And so, when Paris took her across the sea to Troy, a single act of desire ignited the flames of war. Across Greece, kings and heroes answered the call. Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon rallied the might of 1,000 ships. Odysseus, cunning and reluctant, was drawn by an oath he once helped forge. Ajax, mighty and proud. Nestor, wise and aged. And Achilles, the son of a goddess, unmatched in skill and destined for glory or death. From every corner of the Greek world, warriors gathered beneath black sails, bound by vengeance and prophecy. The winds themselves seemed to hold their breath as the fleet surged toward the shores of Troy, a city of gold, destined for ruin. The gods watched, some in pity, others in amusement, for they knew, what mortals could not, that this war was never truly about Helen. It was about pride, about fate, about the inevitable downfall that comes when men challenge gods and gods play with the hearts of men. 10 years would pass before it ended. 10 years of blood, betrayal, and sorrow. The heroes of legend would rise and fall, and the world itself would never be the same. This was the beginning of a war that would echo through eternity. Part 1. The Wrath of Achilles. The 10th year of the Trojan War had come, and still the walls of Troy stood unbroken. For 9 long years the Greeks had burned the lands around the city, taken its allies, and looted its treasures. And through it all, one name echoed louder than any other: Achilles, son of Peleus and the sea goddess Thetis. He was not merely a warrior, he was a force of nature. When Achilles entered battle, the Trojans fled before him. His bronze armor blazed beneath the sun, his spear struck faster than lightning, and his voice carried over the din of war like thunder from the gods themselves. Where he fought, victory followed. But even the mightiest of men cannot escape the weight of pride. For among the Greeks stood another, Agamemnon, king of kings, commander of the 1,000 ships, a man of power, but not of humility. When a quarrel arose over spoils of war, a captive woman named Briseis, dear to Achilles' heart, Agamemnon made a choice that would doom his army. In his arrogance, he demanded that Briseis be taken from Achilles as recompense. Before the assembled host, Achilles stood, his heart burning with fury. He could have slain Agamemnon then and there. The thought flashed like lightning behind his eyes. But Athena herself appeared, unseen by others, and held him back. "Restrain your hand," she whispered. "Words may wound, but blood will damn you both." So Achilles turned away, his voice trembling with rage and prophecy. "You will beg for me, Agamemnon, when your men are dying, when the Trojans drive you to your ships, you will cry out for Achilles, and I will not come." With that, the greatest warrior of Greece withdrew from battle. His tent fell silent, his weapons untouched. The Myrmidons, his loyal soldiers, refused to fight without him. And across the battlefield, the Trojans rose with new courage. From the heights of Olympus, the gods looked down. Hera and Athena burned with anger for the Greeks' folly. Apollo, ever the protector of Troy, smiled at the shifting tide. Even Zeus, lord of the heavens, watched with grim amusement, for he knew that no mortal pride, no mortal wrath, could alter the fate already woven. Without Achilles, the Greeks faltered. The Trojans pressed their advantage, driving their enemies back toward the sea. The smoke of burning ships filled the sky, mingling with cries of the dying. And in his tent, Achilles sat alone, torn between love and rage, honor and vengeance. The song of destiny whispered through his heart that his name would live forever, but his life would not. The wrath of Achilles had begun, and with it, the beginning of the end. Part 2. The Rise of Hector. While Achilles withdrew into silence, another hero star began to rise, a light born not from rage, but from duty. His name was Hector, Prince of Troy, the firstborn of King Priam and Queen Hecuba, beloved husband of Andromache, and protector of the city's walls. If Achilles was a storm, Hector was the mountain that stood against it. He did not fight for glory, nor for the whims of gods, but for his home, for his wife, for his infant son, for the people who looked to him as their shield. Each morning, as the sun rose over the plains of Ilium, Hector donned his armor, not with pride, but with purpose. He knew every battle could be his last, and yet he rode forth without hesitation. The Trojans, inspired by his courage, took heart. Their armies, once beaten and afraid, now surged forward like a tide unleashed. Spears clashed, chariots thundered, and the Greeks found themselves driven back to their ships. Without Achilles, there was no one to stop him. Hector became the blazing heart of Troy's resistance. He faced giants among men, Ajax the Great, Diomedes the Bold, Odysseus the Cunning, and he stood unbroken. Even when the gods themselves joined the fight, Hector did not waver. Apollo guided his spear, Ares lent him strength, and the Trojans cried his name as if it were a war song. But behind the roar of battle, the cost of war weighed heavily upon him. When he returned to Troy, he found not celebration, but sorrow. The streets were lined with widows, the temples filled with prayers, and upon the city's walls stood his wife Andromache, her eyes filled with fear. She begged him, "Do not go back to the field, my love. You are our city's hope, but also its heart. If you fall, all will fall with you." Hector took her hands in his voice gentle, though his fate was sealed. "My duty is not mine to choose. I fight so that our son may grow in peace, and that Troy may stand another day. If I die, let it be with honor, let it be with courage." He embraced her and lifted their child, Astyanax, into the air, smiling through tears. The boy reached for his father's helmet, laughing at the great plume of horsehair that danced above it. And for a moment, the warrior became just a man, a father, a husband, a son of Troy. But the call of battle could not wait. The trumpets sounded, and the walls of Troy echoed with the marching of men. Hector turned one last time at the gate, his armor gleaming, his eyes filled with both love and inevitability. Then he was gone, riding toward the fields where destiny waited. From the heights of Olympus, the gods watched in silence. Some wept for him, others envied his courage. For even immortals knew, few among mortals faced their fate with such dignity. And so, as Achilles' wrath smoldered in the distance, Hector's honor blazed upon the battlefield. He became the soul of Troy, the warrior who fought not for pride, but for love. His rise marked Troy's greatest strength and the beginning of its tragedy. Part 3. The Invention of the Gods. As the war raged on and the gods played their cruel game, the Greek camp lay heavy with despair. Achilles, their mightiest warrior, remained in his tent, consumed by anger, pride, and a silence that felt colder than death itself. Without him, the Greeks faltered. Their ships burned, their men fell, and the Trojans pressed harder with every sunrise. Among those who watched the destruction unfold was Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, bound to him not by command, but by love and brotherhood. He could no longer bear to see their comrades die, while Achilles' sword remained sheathed in the dust. Night after night, he pleaded with his friend. "Achilles," he said softly, "if you will not fight, then let me go in your place. Lend me your armor. Let the men see me on the field and believe that you have returned. The sight of your crest, your shield, it will drive them forward. It will save lives." Achilles stared at him, his heart torn between pride and sorrow. He knew the risk. He knew that fate had already spoken, that whoever faced Hector in his armor would not return alive. But Patroclus' resolve was unshakable. Finally, Achilles nodded. He placed his hand upon his friend's shoulder and said, "Go then, Patroclus. Drive them from our ships. But hear me well. Do not chase them to the walls of Troy. Do not face Hector. Leave that for me." Patroclus smiled, not out of arrogance, but of faith. He donned Achilles' shining armor, and in that moment, the Greeks found hope once more. They saw the gleam of their champion, the shadow of invincibility returning to their ranks. The tide of war shifted. Patroclus charged forth, the Myrmidons roaring behind him. Spears flashed, shields splintered. The Trojans fell back in panic, believing Achilles himself had returned to the field. Patroclus drove them from the ships, cutting through the enemy like a storm of vengeance. The plain ran red with dust and blood. But in his triumph, Patroclus forgot Achilles' warning. The thrill of victory carried him too far, past the walls of Troy, into the jaws of destiny. Then came Apollo, unseen, a god cloaked in sunlight and shadow. He struck Patroclus from behind, blinding him, shattering his armor piece by piece. The divine touch left him exposed, dazed, mortal once more. And then Hector came. The Prince of Troy, blazing with fury and honor, saw the armor and thought he faced Achilles himself. Their eyes met for one brief heartbeat. Two warriors, each bound to fate, each deceived by the gods. Hector drove his spear into Patroclus' chest. The bronze tip pierced deep, and the light in his eyes began to fade. As he fell, Patroclus gasped his final words, not in hatred, but in prophecy. "Hector, you have slain me, but know this, Achilles will come for you. And with my death, yours is already sealed." He fell upon the earth, his blood soaking into the soil that had claimed so many before him. The winds carried his last breath, and even the gods turned away, unable to watch what they had set in motion. When word reached Achilles, the sound that tore from his chest was not that of a man, but of a wounded god. The sea itself trembled. The waves rose as Thetis, his mother, heard her son's cry echo across the world. Patroclus was gone, and with him, the last fragment of Achilles, mercy. From that moment on, the battlefield would know only rage, a wrath so pure, so unrelenting, that even Olympus would tremble before it. Patroclus had fallen. and the world would soon learn what it meant to awaken the fury of Achilles. Part 4. The Death of Patroclus. The dawn that followed Patroclus, death was unlike any other. It did not rise in gold or fire, but in shadow, heavy, silent, as though the sun itself mourned. Achilles stood apart from his men, staring toward the smoke rising from the battlefield. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from a fury too vast for words. The armor that once bore his name now lay in Trojan hands, stained with his friend's blood. Patroclus, his brother in arms, his second soul, was gone, and something inside Achilles broke. Thetis, his divine mother, came to him from the sea, her face carved with sorrow. She knew what his silence meant. She knew that no force on heaven or earth could restrain him now. "Child," she whispered, "if you return to battle, you will die. This is the fate spoken long ago. Your glory will burn brighter than any star, but it will not burn long." Achilles lifted his gaze, and for a moment the grief softened in his eyes. He answered, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of destiny. "Then let me die, but first let me avenge him." Thetis wept, but she obeyed. She went to Hephaestus, the god of the forge, and begged him to craft new armor for her son. Armor worthy of a hero who would defy even fate. And so the god struck his hammer upon the anvil of Olympus, shaping divine bronze with fire and thunder. When it was done, the armor shone with impossible light. The breastplate glimmered with stars. The shield carried the very image of the world itself. Cities, oceans, constellations, the endless dance of life and death. When Achilles donned it, even the immortal gods looked away, for no mortal had ever seemed so near to godhood. He returned to the Greek camp, his presence alone stilling every heart. Men who had once feared his wrath now saw salvation in his eyes. He spoke no words of comfort, only of war. "Bring me my chariot," he commanded. "Today I will make the Trojans remember why they feared the name of Achilles." The horses, immortal and bright, pawed at the earth, their eyes filled with the same divine rage that burned in their master's heart. When the gates opened, the sound of his chariot thundered like a storm. The Trojans saw him coming, gleaming like the sun, death and vengeance made flesh. Their courage faltered, their shields trembled, and the gods themselves fell silent, watching as destiny unfolded. Achilles cut through the Trojan ranks like a blade through smoke. Spears shattered against his shield, arrows turned aside by unseen hands. He fought not as a man, but as a force of nature, swift, merciless, unstoppable. He called out Hector's name again and again, his voice echoing over the plain like the roar of a lion. Each time he spoke it, another Trojan fell. He sought not victory, but retribution, not honor, but the soul of the one who had taken Patroclus from him. Even the river Scamander rose up against him, swollen with the corpses of the slain, its waters choked with blood. It cried out to him, "Enough, Achilles! You defile me with the dead!" But Achilles raged on, until the gods themselves intervened to save the world from his fury. And when night finally fell, he stood amid the carnage, his armor glowing faintly in the starlight, his body splattered with the blood of men and gods alike. He had become what all had feared, the living embodiment of wrath. In that moment, Achilles was no longer mortal. He was vengeance. He was grief. He was the storm before the end. And still, the fated meeting had not come. For Hector yet lived, and destiny demanded they face each other before Troy's unbroken walls. Part 5. The Duel of Achilles and Hector. The plain of Troy lay quiet. No clash of spears, no war cries, no thunder of chariots, only the sound of the wind whispering through the dust of 1,000 fallen warriors. At the gates of the city, Hector stood alone, the prince of Troy, defender of his people, husband, father, son. His armor was worn, his sword dull from battle, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. Behind him, the city trembled. Women prayed, children wept, and old men watched from the walls, knowing that what was about to happen would decide the fate of Troy itself. Andromache, his beloved wife, begged him not to go. She clung to him, her tears falling like rain. "Do not face him," she whispered. "You are Troy's heart. If you fall, all will fall." But Hector knew there was no escaping destiny. He had killed Patroclus, and now Achilles, the godlike avenger, was coming for him. He took her hands one last time, his voice steady, though his heart broke with every word. "No man escapes his fate, but if I die, let me die with honor. Let them say Hector fought to the end." Then he kissed her once, kissed his child, and stepped into the sunlight. From beyond the plain, a sound began to rise, deep, rolling, unstoppable. The sound of wheels, the sound of war. Achilles came, his armor blazing like the sun itself, his eyes burning with fury and grief. Each stride of his immortal horses shook the earth. He did not speak, he did not slow. He came for Hector, and only Hector. The Trojans screamed for their prince to retreat inside the walls, but pride and honor chained Hector's feet to the earth. Still, when Achilles drew near, the sight of him, that terrible beauty, that divine wrath, made even the bravest heart falter. Hector turned and ran. 3 times they circled the walls of Troy, Achilles in pursuit, neither man slowing, neither yielding. Even the gods watched in silence, the fate of heroes unfolding before them. Then Athena, ever cunning, appeared to Hector in the form of his brother Deiphobus. "Turn and fight, brother," she urged. "Together we can strike him down." Believing her trick, Hector stopped running and faced his death. He stood tall, planting his feet in the dust, lifting his spear toward the oncoming storm. Achilles slowed his chariot and stepped down. The air between them trembled. 2 worlds colliding, the mortal and the divine. Hector spoke first, his voice calm but filled with sorrow. "I will not beg for my life, Achilles, but swear to me this, that if I fall, you will return my body to my family. Let me be mourned by those I love." But Achilles' reply was colder than iron. "There are no oaths between lions and men. You took from me the one I cherished most. There will be no mercy." And then the world erupted. Spears flew, shields shattered. Hector struck first, his aim true, but the blow glanced off the divine armor forged by Hephaestus. Achilles' counter came swift as lightning, piercing Hector's throat, the one gap in his armor. The prince gasped, staggered, and fell. As life fled his body, his eyes searched for the walls of Troy, for his wife, his son, and for a final glimpse of the city he died to defend. "Remember me," he whispered, and was gone. Achilles stood over him, chest heaving, the fury still burning in his veins. But vengeance, once satisfied, brings no peace. He tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it across the plains, dust and tears following in his wake. From the walls of Troy, Andromache's scream split the heavens, a sound of grief so pure that even the gods turned their faces away. The hero had fallen. The avenger had triumphed. But the world grew darker still. For in killing Hector, Achilles had slain the last reflection of his own humanity. Part 6. The Fall of Achilles. The days after Hector's death were shrouded in silence, a silence heavy as iron. the Greeks mourned no more, for their wrath had been sated. But in the heart of Achilles, the fire still burned. Fierce, restless, unyielding. He had avenged Patroclus, yet peace eluded him. For a man born of gods and mortals, there could be no peace, only destiny. In the camp by the sea, Achilles sat alone beside the still body of Hector. The moonlight danced across the armor forged by Hephaestus himself. Yet even its divine brilliance could not outshine the emptiness within him. He had won the greatest duel of the age, and yet he felt no triumph, only the echo of loss. The songs of the Greeks rose around the campfires, but Achilles did not join them. He was a man walking the edge of prophecy, for it had been foretold long ago by Thetis, his immortal mother, that he had two fates. If he stayed at home, he would live long, forgotten by history. But if he went to Troy, he would win eternal glory and die young. And now, with every breath, he knew which path he had chosen. Then came the messenger, King Priam, father of Hector, old and broken, guided by Hermes, entered the Greek camp in the dead of night. He knelt before Achilles, the slayer of his son. The tent fell silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. The old man took the hands that had killed his child and pressed them to his lips. "Remember your own father," he whispered. "I have kissed the hands that killed my son. But grant me this, his body, so that I may bury him." Achilles' heart, so long hardened by rage, cracked like a shell under the weight of those words. For the first time, he saw not an enemy, but a father's grief, a mirror of his own pain. He lifted Priam up, wept with him, and gently returned Hector's body. In that moment, two mortal enemies shared a single sorrow, and the gods themselves wept for what men had become. For a time, Achilles found a shadow of peace. But fate does not forgive, and the gods do not forget. The sun rose again, and with it came new war. Among the Trojans now stood a prince, tall, proud, and deadly, Paris, the man whose love had begun it all. Guided by Apollo, god of archery, Paris stood upon the walls of Troy as Achilles charged across the plain once more. The air was thick with dust and death, but the god's hand was steady. The arrow flew, golden, silent, inevitable. It struck Achilles in the heel, the one place his mother's hands had not touched when she dipped him into the river Styx. The mighty warrior staggered. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath him. His sword fell from his grasp. His knees sank into the dust he had once conquered. He looked toward the sky, toward the realm of his divine father, and a faint smile touched his lips. "So this is how heroes die," he whispered. The Greeks carried him from the field in silence. His death broke them more deeply than any Trojan blade ever could. Even the waves mourned, for the sea goddess Thetis rose from the depths, her cry echoing across the shores. She gathered her son's body, wrapped it in silver cloth, and called upon the muses to sing. The lament of Achilles, a dirge that would outlast empires. They burned his body upon a pyre, the flames rising to the heavens, his spirit ascending to the isles of the blessed, where heroes find rest beyond mortal pain. And as the smoke curled into the sky, the gods themselves looked down and knew that the age of heroes was nearing its end. For Achilles, greatest of the Greeks, had fallen not by might, but by destiny. And in his death, the world learned a bitter truth, that even those touched by the divine cannot outrun the will of fate. The war raged on. But without Achilles, its heart had turned hollow, its songs now mourning instead of celebrating. His name, however, would never fade. It would live in whispers, in storms, in the roar of battle. The name of the man who defied gods, kings, and death itself. Achilles, the immortal in memory, the mortal in flesh. the hero who fell and yet would never truly die. Part 7. The Wooden Horse. The war had raged for 10 long years, 10 years of blood, fire, and broken oaths. Yet neither side could claim victory. The gods had turned their faces away, and the fields before Troy were littered with the bones of heroes. But where strength had failed, cunning would now prevail. Odysseus, the man of many wiles, conceived a plan so audacious it could only have been born from desperation. He commanded the Greeks to build a great wooden horse, vast, towering, magnificent, an offering, they claimed, to Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. Inside its hollow belly, he hid the greatest warriors of Greece, men like Odysseus himself, Menelaus, Diomedes, and Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles. Then, as dawn rose upon the plain, the Greeks burned their tents, boarded their ships, and sailed away. Or so it seemed. Only the horse remained, standing silent before Troy's gates, its carved eyes gazing toward the city like a divine omen. When the Trojans awoke and saw the empty shore, joy erupted. After a decade of siege, the Greeks had fled. Their enemies were gone. Their gods had delivered them. The people poured from the gates, laughing, weeping, singing. They circled the horse, marveling at its beauty. But in their triumph, voices of warning were ignored. Cassandra, cursed with the gift of prophecy, cried out that ruin hid within the wood, but none would believe her. Laocoon, the priest of Poseidon, hurled his spear at the horse, shouting, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts." And as if to silence him, 2 great serpents rose from the sea, sent by the gods, and crushed him and his sons before the horrified crowd. Taking the omen as proof of divine favor, the Trojans dragged the horse into the city. They feasted, they danced, they drank, until the stars wheeled high above the walls of Troy. And then, when all had fallen silent, when the fires burned low and sleep claimed the weary, the trap was sprung. A hidden hatch creaked open. Greek warriors slipped into the night, blades glinting in the dark. They opened the gates to the returning fleet, waiting just beyond the horizon. Troy slept its final sleep, unaware that before dawn, its proud towers would burn, and the songs of its people would fade into legend. Part 8. The Sack of Troy. The first light of dawn revealed the horror. Smoke curled into the sky, black and heavy, choking the morning sun. The walls of Troy, once proud and unyielding, now trembled under the fury of the Greeks unleashed from within. The city erupted into chaos. Shouts and screams mingled with the clash of bronze and the roar of flames. Greek soldiers poured through the gates, swords singing, torches blazing, cutting down all who resisted. Mothers clutched children, fathers tried to defend their homes, but nothing could withstand the wrath that had finally entered Troy. Priam, the aged king, fled to the sanctuary of the gods, hoping to find protection among altars and sacred shrines. Yet even here, mercy did not follow. Achilles, son Neoptolemus, seized him and dragged him to the altar, striking him down with merciless hands. The heart of Troy itself seemed to shatter with the king's last breath. Amid the carnage, one figure moved with purpose, Aeneas, son of Anchises and the goddess Aphrodite. Carrying his elderly father upon his back and leading his young son by the hand, he fled through the streets, past the flames and the fallen. Each step was heavy with sorrow, yet each step carried hope. For within him lay the seed of a new world, a future born from the ashes of the old. Temples crumbled, palaces burned, and the blood of warriors soaked the streets. The cries of the defeated rose to the heavens, answered only by the watchful eyes of the gods. Some mourned, some rejoiced, some remained distant, indifferent to the mortal suffering below. The age of heroes ended that day, not with fanfare or triumph, but in fire and blood, in the echoes of screams and the silence of those who would never rise again. Troy, once a jewel of human achievement and divine favor, was reduced to ruin, a memory etched forever into the songs and sorrows of men. And yet, even in this devastation, life endured. Aeneas' flight promised continuation, a bridge between what was lost and what was to come. The city lay in ruin, the heroes were dead, but history would remember, for the story of Troy would never fade. The war that began with an apple had ended with the fall of a city, leaving nothing but legends, shadows, and the lessons of pride, love, and fate. Part 9. Legacy and Reflection. The smoke cleared, leaving a city reduced to rubble, but the echoes of Troy's fall reverberated far beyond its broken walls. The gods, who had long meddled in mortal affairs, now watched in silence, their interventions complete, their judgment passed. Olympus was quiet, yet the weight of the deeds below lingered like a shadow over the earth. From the ashes, the lessons of the war emerged. Pride, the desire to be deemed the fairest, had sparked a decade of slaughter. Love, both divine and mortal, had kindled deeds of courage and folly alike. Revenge, bitter and unyielding, had driven men to acts both heroic and horrific. And through it all, destiny, cruel, unchangeable, and inexorable, had guided each step, reminding mortals that some fates could not be avoided. The heroes who had fallen, from Hector to Achilles, were immortalized not in life, but in story, their deeds and flaws recorded in song and memory. Troy itself, though destroyed, became eternal in the minds of men, a cautionary tale and a source of wonder, a city that lived on in legend where bricks and mortar had crumbled. Bards would sing of the mighty warriors, of the cunning Odysseus, the brave Aeneas, and the doomed yet noble Hector. Scholars and poets would recount the wrath of gods and the folly of men, weaving the events into the tapestry of human culture. The war's lessons endured, shaping how mortals understood love, loyalty, honor, and the perilous cost of hubris. Troy had fallen, yet its story did not die. In every retelling, it grew larger than life, teaching each new generation about the fragile balance between fate and free will, between glory and destruction. Its walls may have burned, its people scattered, but the memory of Troy, its heroes, and its tragic beauty became immortal. A reminder that even in ruin, stories can endure forever, and that the deeds of men and gods alike leave footprints upon eternity. The end of an age. The sun set over the shattered plains of Troy, casting long shadows across streets, still smoldering from the fire of war. Silence settled where once the cries of battle had risen, a heavy, mournful stillness that seemed to echo the grief of mortals and gods alike. The city was gone, its walls fallen, its people scattered, yet the weight of its story remained, a tale of pride, love, vengeance, and fate that would resonate through the ages. The heroes who had lived and died there, Achilles, Hector, Paris, and so many others, were gone from the world of men, yet immortal in memory. Their triumphs, their failings, their choices, and their destinies were etched into the annals of history, shaping the hearts and minds of all who would hear their tale. Even the gods who had played their parts and watched in awe or anger fell silent, letting mortals carry forward the lessons of ambition, hubris, courage, and love. For the fall of Troy was not merely the end of a city, but the close of an age where men and gods walked the same stage, where glory was chased, and destiny was confronted with sword and shield. And though empires rise and crumble and heroes meet their fate, the story itself endures, whispered across generations, preserved in song, in poetry, in memory, and in the endless retelling of human experience. Empires crumble, heroes die, But stories, they endure. And in the ruins of Troy, legend itself was born.
And that's it for today. The story of the fall of Troy. The end of an age of heroes. I hope you all enjoyed this journey through myth and legend. If you did, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves epic stories just as much as you do. Thank you very much, take care, and see you next time. Bye bye.